Welcome to The Advisor with Stacey Chillemi, where we dive deep into the real issues impacting today's world. I'm your host, Stacey, and today we're honored to have with us Brian Wetzel. He's part of our podcast community. He has his own podcast on our show, and he is dedicated advocate to the education reform. Brian brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table with a background deeply enhanced and enriched, identifying and addressing the problems with our educational system. His work has shed light on many systematic issues and often overlooked, and he is passionate about finding actionable solutions to transform the way the education system is for future generations. In today's episode, we're going to explore a lot of crucial issues that are occurring in today's society, including children with learning disabilities, understanding um, uh, what teachers really want parents to know. And we're going to go dive deep into a lot of topics that aren't really talked about, but really need to be addressed. Brian, can you start by sharing a little about your background and what led you to focus on the issues in today's educational system?
Yes. Well, in 2009, I founded a company with a partner that created educational resources for K through 12. Um, and it was during that time that meeting with school districts, traveling around the country, doing speeches, talking with probably over 1,000 teachers, that a lot of what I saw was alarming, and it just compelled me. I wanted to let everyone know, particularly parents, that there's a lot more going on than we realize. And I've used this analogy many, many times, that when we got into education as a company, I thought that when I got a peek behind the curtain, that a lot of the decisions would make sense. I would see the wisdom in those decisions, and I actually was more confused. There's a lot of things that go on that I don't think are good policy, make very little common sense. Um, and in some respects, I felt were very alarming, that we're not, the priority sometimes has slipped away from the education of the children to battles over money or social issues and things that are not necessarily beneficial to the outcome that originally we send our kids to school for,
Right.
which is to get a good education and move on to a career, whether that's in a four-year college or a trade.
Oh, I agree completely with you. I think we have a lot of issues going on in school systems around the country. And, depending on the income and the amount of money that's put into these school systems, because every school system is different, we've come across a lot of problems where children aren't getting adequate care in many different areas of their education. And, when it comes to, in your opinion, what are the most pressing problems currently plaguing in today's educational system?
Whew, that is a long list. Um, I would say it's hard to prioritize them by number, because depending on which lane you're in, everything seems to be worse than the other. But I one thing that we should be concerned about is that we're losing teachers. Right now, there's over 100,000 teaching positions open, and they're estimating that by 2027 there'll be 200,000 unfilled positions.
Oh, wow.
And these are teachers who are leaving the profession. They actually went to college, got their student loan, did 4 years, then they worked for free for a year, because you have to, in most states, you have to do what's called TOS, or
Right.
it's essentially you sitting in the class and with another experienced teacher, and sort of being mentored. Then you have your student teaching period. They've done all of this work, and in most states, you had to pass the praxis, or a test that certifies that you're qualified to be a teacher.
Mhm.
And even with that, they're leaving the profession. And in most cases, the teaching profession does have one great thing about it, and that's that the benefits are typically pretty good.
Mhm.
But you got to get to the end to get a lot of those benefits, and it's just a lot of teachers are saying it's too much stress, and there is a lot of stress. It's too much work. They're not being supported by administration to the point, and the behavior, as we've talked about in previous shows, is gotten much worse to the point that they don't feel like it's worth staying in the profession any longer. Right now, and this has been a statistic that goes back 10 years, 50% of teachers coming out of college will not last 5 years. They'll
Wow.
be out of the profession. And then that remaining 50%, only about 40% will make it to 10 years. And since you typically have to get to 20 to get your pension,
Hmm.
um, that means that someone's making a choice of all that time they put in to get out of it and not make it to the pension or not make it to the end.
Yeah.
Um, we should be alarmed by that. What that typically means, and I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but I think it's something like 35 to 40% of teachers who are in schools right now haven't been teaching 5 years. That means that nearly half of the teachers across the country have less than 5 years experience. And I can
Wow.
tell you from experience, having worked with teachers and having them do lessons for us, an experienced teacher is a it's there's a big difference. And every teacher I ever interviewed about this will tell you that my first 3 or 4 years, I was just getting into the groove, trying to figure things out. And then I really started to get it, started to understand the students, how what was best, how to communicate, how to teach certain things. A teacher with experience is so much better. It just is what it is. In most professions, the more experience you have, the better you are, and teaching is no different.
Right.
Um, so that is one of the main things I think that people should be worried about. Um, the behavior that is somewhat helping lead to that shortage continues to get worse. I've heard people argue about this, but I interviewed teachers and administrators who were just retiring. Every single one of them, not without me bringing it up, by the way,
Hmm.
said that behavior continues to get worse. There's more entitlement, more narcissism in our students. There's a lot more parents who maybe grew up entitled also. I don't know where this is coming from, who are
Yeah.
teaching their kids that the teacher is not necessarily their friend, that the system is against you, and therefore it's okay to disrespect them if you don't feel like you're being respected.
Hmm.
And when I say that, you might be thinking I'm talking about high school. I'm talking about all the way down to first grade.
Wow.
Um, I have heard elementary school students, while I was in a school meeting, telling their teachers to F off,
Wow.
um, there's stories of them throwing things at teachers in, second, third, fourth, fifth grade. Um, it just, it's not the way it used to be. Now, one of the things about that, when in my day, if I had said that to a teacher, I would have been out of the school for a
Yeah.
week. And if it happened again, I might be out of school for the rest of the year.
Right.
That doesn't happen much anymore. Most school districts are very reticent to remove a student completely. Now they have to build a case because they don't want to be sued.
Hmm.
Um, And we've all seen the memes about how parents today do not, when I was a kid, if I got in trouble at school, I got in trouble at home. But nowadays, the teacher has to answer for why they got their child in, someone's child in trouble.
Right.
That makes that I never allowed my kids to come home and say the teacher's against me. They're just
Right.
singling me out. Teachers have a lot to do. They don't have time for that. Um, And what makes me laugh about this is that I heard so many stories of teachers saying, well, they took a student out of my class because the parents said I was picking on them and moved them to another class with a different teacher. But guess what? In that class, the same behavior and same problems followed.
Right.
So if you're the parent, you have to stop and think, well, maybe it's not the school or the
Yeah.
teachers. Maybe there's a problem here that we need to address. Um, I also think that parents are not as strict as they used to be. I think
Mhm.
that's a stretch to say that, considering the kind of things my parents did. I mean, I got spanked. I got
Yeah.
spanked in school.
Hmm.
Um, the and I'm not advocating for, beating our children again, but there's very little consequence anymore for kids who are doing bad. And when I mentioned earlier how a lot of the decisions at the school level seem to lack common sense, I have heard from teachers stories where they sent a child down to the office for disrupting class, and the kid came back with candy. Basically, like, now, if you go back down and mind yourself, you can have this. Okay, well, what do you think happens when they walk into class with that? Everybody wants some. And
Yeah.
you didn't fix the problem. All you did was bribe them temporarily. And if they know they can get rewards for going to the office, how are you preventing that from happening again? You're not. And I don't understand why that's not understood, but those are decisions that are being made at many district levels. And I heard that story from all across the country, by the way.
Right.
Um, what else I mean, there's a lot. I think that one of the other big problems is that there's a lot of fighting going on right now about choice and vouchers. And the idea is that these are going to take away money from your local public school, and people say, well, that's wrong.
Hmm.
Okay, but at the same time, the reason parents take their kids out of the public schools because they don't feel like that school's doing a good job for them. And so
Right.
my answer to those people always, I mean, always, is then
Mhm.
just do better. Do better at the local school. No parent wants to drive out of their way to take their child to another school that's nowhere close to home. They only
Exactly.
do that when they feel like it's a last chance for their child. I'm not going to be the one to tell a parent that your child is just going to have to suffer and not get a good education because we must keep a building up the street funded fully. That doesn't make any sense to me. But
Right.
maybe all of that could be corrected if the schools just did a better job. Cut all of the stuff out, the social and emotional learning classes, get rid of social issues. Um, the list goes on, but I don't see enough people in the education space that the things that they're trying to fix are all really just band-aids, and they're not really fixing the underlying issues. And
Right.
there's a lot of them, but a lot of them stem from the same source. Um, Most of the decisions are just to placate the situations that are out of hand. And instead of fixing them full time, they're just trying to get them to go away. When it comes to students, for instance, a lot of schools take that policy. If you're in middle school, we know that child will be out of here in 3 years. Let's see if
Right.
we can avoid any major problems. Until then, we can push it off on the high school, elementary school, you know.
Right.
So I don't, the answers are really for them to start holding accountability, not only to the students, there's teachers also, but I honestly wish that you could say what you need to say to parents without getting in trouble. Trust me, I tell my wife all the time I would be fired in the first day. Because the first time a parent told me that it was my fault that they weren't doing their homework or they were talking or they were being disruptive, I would have to give them a few hints on how to parent properly.
Right.
That probably wouldn't go well.
Yeah.
Um, But if I had to put the top five, it would be those five things.
You mentioned earlier in a conversation that that there are certain things teachers have mentioned that they would really love parents to know. What are some of the things
Yes.
that parents really need to understand from a teacher's perspective, from what they're seeing?
Well, the first one we just touched on is that believing everything your kid says when they come home
Hmm.
about what went on in school. And I can speak to this. I don't understand how parents don't understand this. When I was a kid, I got in trouble once in fifth grade,
Hmm.
and I came home and lied to my parents about
Hmm.
why.
Right.
But I didn't know they were going to be talking to the teacher. So I got busted and got in more trouble. But
Mhm.
kids will lie to get out of trouble. That no kid wants to get in trouble. I'm an adult. I don't want to get in trouble. But you, they will often lie to you. And when you're a parent and you're believing everything, it's just amazing how many teachers have multiple stories about a parents calling up and saying, my child said they didn't do that. It wasn't them. They weren't the
Mhm.
one who wrote that or said that or broke whatever.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of times, especially nowadays, there's video cameras everywhere except for the bathrooms. And so
Right.
they can pull the camera and literally show what went on. And still the parents will say, well, I want them out of that class.
Mhm.
Um, but teachers, I had a teacher tell it to me like this. She said, I won't believe if you don't believe everything your child says went on here in my class, I won't believe everything they tell me went on at your house.
Right.
Because sometimes teachers do hear about things that go on at home, but they don't always believe it, particularly if it's a younger kid, because they exaggerate and they
Yeah.
don't always understand what they're saying.
Right.
The next thing that this one made me laugh because I've heard this one from my wife.
Mhm.
So we've gotten a very soft, it's it's been joked about for years about how soft our generation is now, the generations that are raising kids now. But
Yeah.
there's a problem. Teachers are getting inundated now, not inundated, but it comes up a lot
Right.
where you have parents who say my child's being bullied.
Mhm.
And teachers want the parents to understand there's a difference between teasing and bullying.
Right.
Teasing is just teasing. If a child is making fun of your child's lunch that he brought from home, that's teasing. Bullying would be taking their lunch and smashing it or throwing it in the garbage or spitting in it. That would be bullying.
Right.
And but they're routinely getting, such and such said that this other child said this to them on the playground. Okay, well then tell them to ignore that. That's not bullying necessarily. So we can't, like, teachers would want you to understand as a parent, like they can't run around trafficking what every child says, particularly at the edge at the elementary school level, because these are 5 to 10-year-olds,
Yeah.
and they say stupid things. They're little kids. They just are.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was the one that made me laugh is that there's a difference between, and so please be careful what you tell your child. They're not being bullied when someone makes fun of their sandwich,
Mhm.
was one of the examples that was given to me. Um, Here's one that I have actually heard many times. And I've heard even friends of mine say, "Well, my child was scared to go into their class in elementary school, so I walked him to class every
Right.
day."
Mhm.
But what teachers will tell you is that's the wrong way to handle that. The school is a safe environment. When you drop them off, tell them they will be fine. It gives them agency to be independent, to
Right.
go to the class on their own. Every single teacher I've ever spoken to has told me this, and I've witnessed this with my own children because I did it wrong. But that the moment you leave, they stop crying and they're just playing with their friends in the class or
Yeah.
doing class stuff. They're only doing the crying for you, the effect for you. And
Mhm.
so let them be independent. It's even as a little child, elementary school should be considered a safe environment for them. They're
Right.
not going to get lost and nothing bad should happen while they're trying to find their class. Um, this one also makes me laugh because I've heard this. It has been a while, but I've heard this too. Parents will say, well, my child isn't doing well in school because they're so smart. that they're bored in class.
Mhm.
And teachers want to know that no, that's not true. Your little Mensa student is not doing their work. They're not trying. That there's a difference between being too smart to be in class in this class and not actually doing the actual work.
Yeah,
And one of the a lot of teachers have told me this, that the students who are very, very smart, they get bored because they get their work done faster than everyone else because it was a
right.
little easier. And that's when they're bored. It's not when they get handed a worksheet and they don't turn it in. So um, a lot of I've even seen that posted on Facebook. It makes me cringe.
Yeah,
Your child is not doing poorly. Their grades are not low because their brains are this high. That's not how that works.
right.
But you're just making an excuse. Um, this one is one I wrote in the book that I saw a lot, so I'm going to throw it in. And that is that you need to prioritize your child's education over recognition. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is, and I think we talked about this last time, that teachers routinely, even as early as elementary school, will tell me that parents will sometimes do their child's homework. It's in their writing. They don't even hide it. And that is because that parent wants them to get a good grade so badly. But the idea is to educate your child to get them smarter, not you. You've already
Right.
done this work. Your
Exactly.
priorities are on showing off their grades or how well they did, but they didn't do the work. So that doesn't count. So you're really
Right.
just doing it for yourself. I actually saw a child psychologist recently it just popped up on my YouTube feed. And he said the same thing. He said, you're doing this for your own gratitude, not for theirs,
Right.
because they're not doing the work. So they can't be prideful about their grade. They might think
Exactly.
they are, but they'll get older and realize I didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
So, and that comes back to the thing we talked about last time about um, sports.
Hmm.
Please prioritize their work and how well they're doing in school above being out till 11 o'clock at night in fifth as a fifth grader playing sports.
Right.
I love sports, played it, coached it. Okay, but at the end of the day, if your child is falling asleep in class the next day because they didn't get home until 11, ate some
Yeah.
dinner, showered, and got in bed at midnight, maybe you're not really doing what's best for them.
Right.
They're probably not going to move on, sorry, to the pros. So let's give them, a good foothold on their education so that they can move on and have a good career.
Yes. I agree.
Um, and lastly is one that all teachers want parents to understand that they don't make the rules. They don't
Hmm.
make the policies. That's at the administrative level. So yelling at them or sending them emails about a decision that was made or how something's being handled is really out of their control. They,
Right.
like any other employee of a business, they're following the edicts that are sent down from above.
Hmm.
And you need to take that up with a higher level at the education at your district, either at your principal, which is what they would prefer,
Yeah.
or above that. But the the policies are not made by the teachers, and the teachers do not have agency to just change them
Hmm.
for the circumstances that go on in their class. That's not how that works. Um, and so you need to focus your ire on where the real problem is. Now, by the way, if you're looking for the rules to be changed just for your child, then maybe we should go back to the setting the right priorities. Um, because that it in most cases you're looking for something to be changed to benefit your situation and not everybody else's.
Right.
So that would be those are the ones that I wrote down that have been emailed to me over the past month.
How do you think these problems are affecting students' learning experiences and outcomes?
Wow, that's a long answer. The short
Mhm.
answer to that would probably be um, we would have to sit down and make a almost a flow chart. But in a situation where the parents are defending bad behavior, doing their homework, you're entitling your child to not try hard and to be continue to be disruptive, and
Mhm.
there's no consequences to it. There will be some down the road, even if it's after high school. That behavior doesn't fly in public,
Right.
and you're you're not helping them, but while they're in school, you're just making it more difficult for teachers who are just trying to get through educating a class of multiple students. And that's
Yeah.
important for people to also remember. Your child is not the only child in that class. There's a lot going on.
Hmm.
Um, on that question, if you're talking about um, if you're talking about things where the administration is allowing bad behavior,
Hmm.
well, I think that that's twofold. Y- You're now setting them up to be understanding that that their tail is wagging the dog.
Hmm.
You understand, kids are very manipulative when they want to be, and
Right.
if you are allowing them to get away with things and get rewards for the wrong behavior, you're not going to get less of that behavior. You're going to get more of it.
Hmm.
If someone had rewarded me every time I was acting like a little jerk when I was young, I probably would have continued and escalated to see how far I could take it.
Yeah.
Um, I think that those are the two main problems with how it affects kids in the class. If we're going to some of the things we talked about before, where curriculum has changed or it's made to be too hard, the one thing
Hmm.
I worry about with students in that instance is that they're checking out and
Right.
thinking that they just can't do it. And I think
Hmm.
that that is wrong. I've already spoken and I wrote about how the rigor needs to be brought down to closer to grade level.
Right.
That's not to say that all kids can't do it, but if the majority or if a large majority, let's say 30% are struggling with the harder curriculum, well,
Hmm.
then maybe that harder curriculum belongs in a gifted program.
Right.
Um, but I worry that what happens is they'll check out. I've heard the elementary school kids tell me, well, I'm just not good in math. Well, I'm not either. But I hated hearing a child that young has already decided that there's no hope for me
Hmm.
and that they have many years of math classes left and
Right.
they've already decided that this is above my ability. I think that's a bad thing. I really
Yeah.
do.
Hmm. I really do too. What challenges do you think teachers face that they often are overlooked by policymakers and parents and the public?
Well, what teachers would tell you about policymakers is that a lot of times the policies that they do make things more difficult for them.
Hmm.
Um, it's as if these policymakers have never been in a classroom. Some of them haven't. Some have, though. Um, but earlier, when I mentioned that, parents don't need to take up their complaints about policy with the teacher, it's not their decision.
Hmm.
Well, when you make a policy that's controversial or unpopular, well, who do you think's going to hear about that first? It's going to be the
Yeah.
teacher who has to answer to that.
Hmm.
And that a lot of times when new policies come down, you will actually hear teachers say, "Oh, I know I'm going to hear about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to get an earful." And I would tell you this, a lot of those that really very rarely, I think Common Core was the one time where parents got riled up so much that they began attending meetings to complain about curriculum, mostly math. Most of the time, it's going to be social issues, which is why I think that that should just be left for home.
Yeah.
If you're, look, we can have a debate about whether a child should have in elementary should have books that show people having sex and how to do it. I
Hmm.
don't think that that's appropriate at that age level, but there are
Right.
apparently people who do. We can have that argument, but I don't think that forcing that on, there are parents who are going to get really worked up about that because they feel like that's inappropriate. And I think that when you're at a in a position of authority and you are telling parents, well, this is what we've decided and you're just going to have to live with it, that doesn't go over very well,
Right.
especially when it comes to social issues, because everybody has a different view of that, what depending on what your religion is, whether you're religious
Right.
at all, or what your perspective is. I was reading an article last year. It was from a doctor. It was it was actually out of Canada, but he was talking about how there are studies that show that kids at a very young age are seeing porn these days, and that is leaving them because of devices, and that
Yeah.
is leaving them damaged. Their a view of what sex means in a relationship in particular is
Right.
getting skewed and damaged.
Yeah, for sure.
And so the argument I would have is that just because there's a book at school that they can check out from the library that supposedly deals with that, is it appropriate for a 7-year-old to already be hearing that? I just don't think it is. So I would
Yeah.
be on the other end of that. If my kids were in a school where that was being pushed on them,
Hmm.
I would probably pull them out.
Right.
So why at a district level or in at those policymakers, why are you doing that? I don't understand. Just
Yeah.
teach. I just want my kids are out of school now. I just want them
Right.
to learn how to do math, science, history, English language arts. I want the basics
Hmm.
that you and I probably learned when we were in school.
Right.
I don't
Oh,
ever remember my teachers talking to me about social issues. I mean, if somebody was being rude to another student, that would come up,
yeah.
particularly if it was along racial lines or along gender lines.
Hmm.
But that was very rare, to be honest with you. Don't even know if I could come up with an example. But I think it's better that way. Let the parents teach those things at the age that they feel is appropriate. They just, I just think that that's a safer way to go. So back to your question, how does what are those how do they affect the teachers? Well, the teachers are the ones who they're the ones that take the gunfire, so, metaphorically, for
Yeah.
these decisions that are not popular.
Right.
Um, my wife 2 years ago, for the first time during pre school, that week where you meet your teachers the week before school starts,
Yeah.
for the first time had parents say to her, sort of whispering under their breath, like, "You don't teach, you're not teaching gender stuff or social issues, are you?" And she would have to say, "No, we don't do that here." And that would make them feel, better. But the fact that they're asking means that it's on every parent's radar and
Yeah.
it's concerning to them. And particularly in our area, we have a lot in Georgia where we live. They just built a Hyundai plant near us.
Hmm.
So we have a lot of Korean and for some reason a lot of Indian students that have moved into the district. And they're a lot more conservative about that stuff than we
Hmm.
are here in America.
Right.
Um, and so that also, in my opinion, supports the argument that everybody has a different timeline or a way of teaching this, and we should leave it to those parents.
Right. Oh, I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. I know that you had mentioned to me earlier that you had a lot of concerns when it came to children with learning disabilities and children
Mhm.
that have developmental issues. What are some of those concerns that you see that are really, bothering you and that really concern you?
Well, I think it's the increase. Let me separate out a couple things though.
Hmm.
Special education, kids who are just struggling, and those numbers have gone up. But some of that is quite a bit of that is because they've tinkered with identifying children who have learning disabilities or just are a little slow or behind. And I would tell parents that when in my day, if you were put in special education, that was a bad thing. Like
Right.
it meant that you were, well, I'm not even going to say the word. We aren't allowed to use that word anymore. But it meant that your child was probably heading for a life where they were just not going to be very successful.
Hmm.
Nowadays, it has been changed, and I think it's a positive change, um, where there's levels of special education, and you shouldn't be too concerned about it. All they're
Right.
doing is trying to move them down and have people work with them that deal with the kind of um, learning disability or learning gap that they have to try and get them on par in the future. And that's a good thing.
Right.
And you shouldn't stress about it too much. It's not a lot of students come out of it, but many students do. It isn't impossible to come out of special ed now because special ed
Right.
is not identified as a mental problem. It's more about learning disabilities.
Right.
Um, and it's not uncommon. It's just something that's very easily identifiable. If your child scores up here in reading, but way down here in math, or way up here in math and down here in reading, then there's a learning gap that needs to be looked at.
Right.
When it comes to those things, I want parents also to understand in most states, the school has to provide somebody to help with that. And if they're not, you need to go to your principal and tell them, I demand that
Right.
somebody be working with my child. You have that right.
Hmm.
Um, Now, when it comes to autism, like the new figures are in and they're astounding. It's 1 in 35 kids.
Crazy.
And 10 years ago, it was 1 in 3,000. That's
Yes.
a monumental change.
Yeah.
And we're not going to solve it why it's happening here. I've been reading a lot about it and different opinions, but no one knows. Actually, there's more to that than we're going to get into here. But what I want everyone to know is that you often hear autism as a spectrum, and that is true.
Hmm.
There's more functional autism, and then
Hmm.
there's really non-functional autism.
Yes.
In
Hmm.
most cases, it's functional autism.
Hmm.
And your child will still go on to have a good life. It's not something to panic over, but you do need to get the earlier you intervene in their
Hmm.
speech, in how they deal with, one of the great things about what they've started doing with children with autism is teaching them to look people in the eye and be engaged, which is a problem for them.
Right.
And most people I know who have 20-year-olds who are on the spectrum are doing
Hmm.
fine. I have some good friends of mine. They're from Britain.
Hmm.
Their child, when he was, I remember when he was 4, we met them when he was 4, and there was clearly something up. And now he's a fireman. He's in the Army Reserve. He has a side job diving for valuables that people accidentally dropped. He was
Right.
featured in the news here. Um, he's doing fine.
Hmm.
Okay, but I know that a lot of parents, when he was younger, would have panicked and been
Yeah.
like, "Oh my God, they're going to be living with us forever, and their life is going. We're not going to have grandchildren." Like that, you start going through all the worst scenarios, but
Yeah.
that's not necessarily the case. And so I don't panic, but just start getting them some interventions. I will tell you an interesting story. So the British couple, they refused to let the school. They had him tested outside of school. They
Hmm.
refused to let the school put autism on his records.
Okay.
and they never told him that he was autistic.
Oh, wow.
And the reason they didn't was that they didn't want that to be an excuse for him. In other
Yes.
words, I can't do this. And you know why I can't do it because I got
Autism.
this.
Yeah.
And I think that was a good thing. I have
Hmm.
heard people argue that's a bad thing, but I've looked at how their child turned out. It seems positive to me.
Yeah.
And I also agree with not letting your children have an excuse that they can readily pull out of their pocket
Right.
as a card that says, I get out of this or
Yes.
I get out of trying.
Right.
And so people can handle it however they want, but just that I thought that I think that story is meaning that maybe there is a different way to handle it at home. Um,
Yes.
so what I want people to understand overall about special ed is that when it comes to just learning disabilities, they've changed how that is categorized. It's not like
Hmm.
it was in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
Um, your child will be fine.
Hmm.
Just get them some tutoring at school. Let the intervention at school help them. When it
Yeah.
comes to autism, the sooner you start getting intervention in most school systems, by the way, I would say, I can't remember how many states now. When I wrote the book, it was 23 states, but I think more have added. You can actually start getting them speech therapy at the
Hmm.
local school, even at 3,
Right.
before they're eligible to be in pre-K, because
Right.
it's that important. So take
Mhm.
advantage of that stuff.
Yes.
Um, and if you feel like they might have an issue, then go to your pediatrician and address it with them. They'll give you resources to get them tested. Um, and then, like I said, the sooner you do that, the better off they're going to be.
Yes. A hundred
But
percent.
it's not the end. You don't have to, you don't have to panic like, oh my gosh, it's not, they'll be fine. I promise in most cases.
Right. No, I agree 100%. And I like the idea that they kind of held back and didn't tell their child that they were autistic. Because sometimes children can use that as a crutch or they labelize
Hmm.
themselves. As soon as they hear that word, their self-esteem goes down because then they compare themselves to other kids. I'm not the same like them, and
Yeah.
that could work against them in a sense. So I kind of I like that.
Yeah.
I like
Well, there
that
was a
idea.
story about 20 years ago out of Duluth, Georgia, of a young high school wrestler who was apparently pretty hard to beat, but he had no legs.
Oh,
So
wow.
his upper body was strong and obviously had a low center of gravity. So pinning
Yeah.
him was difficult. But I just remember looking at that and saying, oh, whatever people told him he couldn't do, he he was like, no, I'm gonna do it. And I
Yeah.
may have to work harder, but I'm gonna do it. And but some people don't have that ability. Once they hear that they're deficient somewhere, it
Yeah.
becomes an easy trump card that, well,
Mm.
you know, leave me
Right.
alone. I got
Hmm.
that.
Exactly.
So I actually support that idea, but we didn't have to deal with that. So,
Right.
you know, I can honestly, and by the way, let me first say, I'm not a doctor. I'm
Yeah.
giving you this out of opinions from experience and what other teachers have told me.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
why I say, please see your pediatrician and
Yes.
talk to them about it.
Oh yeah, because there's many tests that they have to run before they could diagnose the child and see where they're at, what level they're at,
Hmm.
and they get the proper care and the proper advice on how to go about it so that child lives the most productive life
Hmm.
possible. There was a woman, she was an actress from the UK, and her daughter was actually very non-functional autistic child. And she got her into special programs, and they were able to make her from non-functioning to functioning. And she was able to graduate college, she became an engineer, and she wrote a book.
Hmm.
She went from one extreme to another just by
Yeah.
getting help and and doing the right programs and exercises.
Yeah. A lot of autistic people, we've heard this. The funny thing is they don't use Asperger's anymore in diagnosis. That apparently
Right.
has gone away. So now it's just high functioning, low functioning, and then in between. But a
Right.
lot of autistic kids are very smart in certain areas, often
Yes.
math.
Hmm.
Um, and so they should be able to do fine in their schoolwork. It's
Hmm.
more going to be social things that you have to get them through.
Yes.
And a lot of them, if they're on the lower end, are going to be very easily distracted or bothered by outside sounds and noises and things. And so
Yeah.
that's where the intervention gets to teaching them how to deal without melting down. But as far as their cognitive ability is for education, I mean, they should do really well.
They did a lot of tests and they found that a lot of autistic children have very high IQs, that they're
Hmm.
very smart, and a lot of them lacked in the social area and the social skills. So they were
Right.
unable to communicate with society, with other people, but they were yet they caught on to things very quickly. Their skills when it came educationally were very high, a lot of them.
Hmm. Yeah. There's a lack of emotion that has to sort of be taught.
Hmm.
I don't know that you can truly teach it, but at least making them aware.
Right.
Um, and then they do, from my view of people I know who have grown children who were diagnosed autistic, they do a good job
Hmm.
with that. But they don't understand why it's getting more frequent, but they definitely have come up with good protocols for educating them and getting them, to adult life where they can be successful.
Right.
And that's why I
Exactly.
always, I wrote in the book under special education, I said, look, the first thing is you don't need to panic. It's going to be fine.
Yes, it's definitely going to be fine.
We
How
want
can
our
parents
kids to be perfect and have the perfect life and
do?
marry the perfect person or meet the perfect person and whatever. But that's not how life, unfortunately, rolls a lot of times. And
Yes.
this is just one of those areas, but it will work itself out.
Oh, for sure. I remember always, trying to imagine my children's life, and I wanted them to have the perfect house, the white picket fence, and,
Yes.
everything. And we want that for our children. But just like you said,
Hmm.
that's just not how life rolls. We have our ups and our downs, and we just have to work through it. And just like everything, we do work through it eventually.
Yeah.
It takes time, it takes resilience, and it takes determination. And if you have those things, you will succeed for sure. For sure.
Yep. Very
Now,
true.
how can parents and communities get involved in supporting meaningful changes in education?
Well, I say this every time that this question comes up is that you have to get
Yes.
involved at the school level. If that's not enough, then get involved at the district level.
Hmm.
If you're really aggressive, you can run to be on the school board.
Right.
But in general, you have to go and make your voice heard.
Yes.
Okay, when you go to the school and by the way, when you go to the school, be diplomatic. Okay, if you go in yelling and fussing, you're just not going to get very far because in most cases, I always tell people like I feel like I'm a very nice guy, but if you come at me with your knives drawn, I'm
Yeah.
going to have my shields up.
Right.
So go in and explain your position, let them tell you their position at the local school level. And this is
Hmm.
the thing. When we talked earlier about teachers not always liking some of the policies that are sent down because they have to hear about it, the local administrators know the same thing. I've
Right.
heard teachers tell me on occasion when I've been interviewing them that their principal said, "I hate telling you you have to do this, but this is what my boss has said." Okay, so
Right.
they get it also. But the good
Right.
news is that a teacher doesn't have a direct line to the district, but the principals do.
Yes.
And so the more they hear from a parent that I'm not happy about this
Yes.
policy or this decision, the
Hmm.
more that makes its way up the chain. And districts don't want they don't want more static from the parents either. So if they
Right.
get enough pushback, if they're hearing from the local administrator that this is not popular and that I'm dealing with a lot of people and
Hmm.
it's wasting my time, a lot of times the district will ease some of those policies or they'll change them.
Yeah.
If it's not getting changed, then go to every district. A lot of people don't even know where they are. That's the funny
Yeah.
thing. But go to, or when they hold them, go on the website for your district, find out when there's meetings, and go up and speak. And
Yeah.
again, please go up and speak like a diplomatic adult.
Right.
Okay. I know that it's emotional, it's your children. By the way, I wish I could speak to many of these commissioners and district leaders. They're not always respectful of the parents from some
Right.
of the videos I've seen. That's not helping either.
Yep.
But they need to at least hear the parents out. Okay,
Right.
even if they disagree, the parents have a concern, and if you can't
Hmm.
address it respectfully, you're just escalating more problems. And if the parents and the district are going to work together, everybody has to hear each other out. Most of the time, and this is where districts fail bad.
Yeah.
Explain why did you make the policy? Explain it. Like what's the reasoning behind it?
Right.
And a lot of times I've seen on some of these videos, not always,
Hmm.
um, where the district seems offended that you would ask.
Right.
Okay, well, I just want to know why is this policy in place? What's the point? Because I
Yeah.
assume you made it because it was a positive change in your mind. Explain it
Right.
to me. Maybe I will change my mind some if I hear it that way, but that's a lot of times it's everybody's just butting heads and
Hmm.
nothing's getting done. But what I would say is that the more people who show up with the same concern about the same policy, that will get noticed.
Yeah.
And remember, the people who are on those commissions a lot of times want to get reelected.
Right.
Um, so if enough people are upset about it, that will resonate with them. If it's one
Right.
person, maybe not.
Mhm. Very true. Now, based on your insights, what do you see as the future of education in these issues that are not addressed right now?
Well, educational numbers, when we talk about testing um, and scores, have continually declined.
Yes.
I don't, since I've been talking about this, which is many years,
Hmm.
I thought that at some point, you know, um, around the country, people would continually see it go down and there would be changes made to try and
Right.
correct it. But I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Which is concerning. I worry that we're graduating. We spoke about this, I think, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, about
Mhm.
particularly in the inner city where they're just graduating hundreds of kids who can't read and write at grade level. What are we doing to our country? This is the future. These are the people who are supposed to take care of the country, take care of us when we get older,
Yeah.
who are supposed to be the next leaders,
Hmm.
inventors.
Yes.
What are we doing when we're not educating them properly?
Right.
Um, I fear that there's going to be a very large gap in our country's progress and development if we don't start putting out smart students who are leaders, who understand how to lead too,
Right.
and not just cancel.
Hmm.
That's not a leadership skill.
Yes.
Um, I fear that we're dooming our country not to totally collapse and fail, but that our progress, as I mentioned, and everything that goes along with that is going to be stymied for a
Yes.
while until we figure it out. And I
Hmm.
don't know why people don't. I argue this all the time when I'm arguing with someone from a public school district or whatever, and they want to take me on. The first thing
Yeah,
I always say is that I've listened to you rant, and I have yet to hear you boast about how good the education is. They
right.
always just talk about money.
Yeah,
And then they want to tell me that the reason we can't educate is we don't have enough money. I'm like, but you keep getting more money. And if money was the problem, every time we give you more money, we should see an incremental jump. And if that was the case, then people would say, oh, okay, so we only need to put in this much more money to get to where we need to. And they would have
right,
no trouble voting on that. But every time they get more money and nothing changes in the education level or scores, that doesn't bode well for your argument.
right,
Start doing a better job educating, and people will be more likely to, to listen to your arguments that come along with all the other issues that you might have at the district level.
right.
It's really more, I just tell people, look, it's what you're putting out. If you're
Mm-hmm.
putting out a good product, which is in this case the students, people will give you more money. They'll have no trouble with that. But if they feel like their money is just being thrown down the drain for a bunch of districts and leadership people to pay themselves bigger salaries, that's not motivating anyone.
Yes. Looking back at your own educational journey, is there something that you experienced that influenced your views? Was there something that really made an impact from the beginning? I know your wife was a teacher, but was it
Hmm.
what really motivated you to want to get involved also and make change?
Well, when we started our company that created resources for K through 12, we started out very altruistic, like
Mhm.
I think a lot of probably teachers do. We had a goal that we thought we were going to um, enhance education and make it better
Mhm.
and create um, products that were easy to use, that were going to help the parents, the schools, the students, everybody involved.
Yeah.
And I think there wasn't a one-time factor, but it was a very quick acknowledgement that what we were doing was being met with a lot of resistance.
Hmm.
And even in some cases, I remember, I'm going to tell this as a controversial story. I didn't even put it in the book,
Yeah.
but I was at a meeting, we had a conference where we had a booth, and it's a room, and there's all these educational products and
Hmm.
services. And it was a conference for administrators, administrators. And the guy who was in the booth next to me, he was in the booth next to me the previous year,
Hmm.
and he was like quadruple our sales. And I was like, "How are you doing that?"
Yeah.
And he literally said, "You see that guy over there? He's got season tickets to this football team. That guy over there has season tickets to this. I got that guy." He was literally getting into these schools by bribing.
Hmm.
And I just remember being disheartened by that. Like I'm not going to buy you season tickets to the
Right.
Falcons so that you use our product. That wasn't
Exactly.
why I got into this. And I wasn't going to go back to our investors who we were trying to get more money from and say I need more money to buy
Yeah.
season tickets for 45
Yeah.
different principles. They just
Right.
couldn't see putting that in a business plan, and you can't put that in a business plan, so you have to do it
Yeah.
under the table. Um, I didn't put that in because I couldn't independently verify that, but he was adamant that that's what he was doing.
I feel like the
Um,
system is a little bit corrupt in many senses.
yeah, it is. I'll tell you a story. This is going to make some Georgia educators mad, but they have a principal conference in Savannah, Georgia every year in the summer. All the principals go.
Hmm.
And by the way, for people who don't realize it, the principals work all year round. They don't have the same schedule as the teachers. They're not off
Hmm.
in the summer. But they would
right,
go to this conference in Savannah, and I paid to have a booth there only one time because you would go down to this, and none of them would show up they would show up for the opening of the conference, the keynote speaker,
right.
and they would show up for the last day for the closing. The 3 days in between, they were all out playing golf.
Oh,
Some of
wow.
them with vendors who were paying for it, but they just played golf and they had a free trip that was paid for free hotel and whatnot. They didn't really, there was nobody walking through looking at the booths or any of the services or products that were being offered. It was a vacation.
Yeah,
And so we didn't go back to that conference. It made no sense to me.
yeah,
But that's just kind of, and it's not unique to education. That goes on in other
yeah.
industries, but that's just an example of what you were talking about, that there's a lot. I don't wouldn't even they wouldn't call it corruption,
Hmm.
but really they were there and the district paid for their tickets there and their hotel to sit in on all of these discussions so they could bring back ideas, but that's not
Yes.
really what's going on in most cases.
Like, for me, like I noticed that many of these individuals, like I see now is that, and I don't remember this when I was growing up, but when it comes to testing, you were talking about school testing, a lot of times they estimate and they change the way they grade. So they, if the kids are doing poorly, they give them an extra 10 points, or they give them extra bonus points, or they change the way they grade their grading system for that particular test.
Hmm.
Um, depending on the students and how well the students have been doing throughout the year, that maybe the big final, or the last test that counts the most, they'll have like they estimate things
Hmm.
and they change things. So if the kids are doing poorly, at the overall end, these extra points they give them, the way they estimate, the way they round off things, they look like they did much better than they actually did. And then, a lot of times that,
Yeah.
I find that, if a school system is doing poorly, then they have a special program they put in there. And that special program requires children with higher IQs. So they bust those kids in because those kids want to take this program. So now you have these kids in the school system because
Hmm.
they're taking this specific program, but now they're part of that school system, and they're taking the end of the year grades, and they're doing
Hmm.
the tests that they have to do, and the SATs and all the other stuff, and their
Some of
midterm.
those schools do that for athletics.
Yeah, yeah. And so they're really not they're not really showing the true level of education that the school system is actually given. They're bringing in other people to kind of like make the grades look higher, to make the
Hmm.
IQs of the children look higher, so it makes the school system overall look better than it actually is.
Right. Right. There's lots of gameplay. Uh, the we could go on the gameplay all day long, but that is one thing that does happen. Yes.
Yeah. Can you
That
tell?
goes on to a lot more often in schools that are in an upper middle class area where they want to maintain a certain um, idea about how well their schools are doing.
Right,
In other words, they can't have failing schools with that income level of parents.
right, right. That makes sense. I don't know if I agree with it, but it makes sense.
I don't agree
Um,
with it.
but when can you tell us a little about your book?
So the book is, as I mentioned earlier, I had a company that made educational resources for K through 12.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's really just a walk through my experience, some of the things I saw, heard, conversations I had with teachers, administrators, district leaders, parents.
Yeah.
Um, it's also about 4 years of research on how the money is handled, the
Mhm.
unions, how curriculum is created and decided upon. Um, I go into different things like school choice and vouchers and charter schools, private schools. Um, and at the very end of the book, I all of the things that I essentially complain about, I have a whole chapter on
Yeah.
solutions. About half of those solutions are my ideas, and then the other half came to me directly from teachers about
Wow.
how to fix problems. But
Wow.
there's really two or three fixes that would make education better almost immediately.
Yeah.
Um, but for some reason never gets done. Even though the research even pointed to, like, one of them is that teachers need to have more autonomy in
Hmm.
class. They don't need to be told how to teach something or a
Yes.
method. If you've been a teacher for long enough, you know how to teach. Tell them the goal, tell them the curriculum that they need to know for the end of the year test. Let the
Yes.
teacher get there however's best based
Hmm.
on her students, whether she has to, a class of students who like to work in groups, work
Yeah.
individually, who are struggling with this and that. Let them get there the way it is best. There is no, I don't know why too many educational districts have this idea that they're looking for a one size fits all method that fits
Right.
everything. And that's just
Hmm.
never going to happen. People are
Yeah.
different. They learn differently. Some are visual, some are, readers.
Yes.
But you got to let the teacher look at the overview of their class and say, this is how I'm going to do it. And that way they can even make adjustments throughout the year based on it, how they see things progressing. But
Exactly.
there's a Stanford long study, and the lady who did the study pointed out that charter schools, which are public schools, by the way, they get public money, that's not a private school.
Hmm.
Charter schools have higher scores, and she was trying to figure out why. And she zeroed in on the fact that charter schools let their teachers, as so do private schools, have the autonomy to teach the curriculum the way they see best fit,
Right.
the way they see fit, what's best for the class. And that also means slowing down and speeding up when you need to. In other
Right.
words, one of the things that teachers in public school often tell me is that we don't have a lot of time for review because they piled so much curriculum on us that we got to go. Like, we're
Yeah.
moving on the next week. If half the class didn't get it,
Hmm.
we're moving on. Whereas in a charter school, if they notice that half the class did not get last week's, then they start a review and try and get them caught up before they move on. And
Hmm.
they can speed up later if they need to, as long as everybody gets to the end with the end goal, which is what the goal of the district or the school should be. Um, that's the one thing. And the funny thing about that is that almost every public school teacher I ever spoke to said, I just want to teach. I want to
Right.
teach. I know how to teach. Let me teach. But they're
Yeah.
constantly being told, this is how you're going to do it this year.
Right.
And I think that's wrong. And with so much, and there was a Harvard study that backed up the autonomy thing.
Hmm.
And yet I haven't seen any district in this country make that change.
Right. No, I haven't either. I haven't either. And it's sad. It's really sad.
Mhm.
Now, what are some of the products and services that you offer, your company offers?
Well, the education company is the assets have been sold off and we are no longer in business.
Okay.
Um, I tell people all the time, you go to Brian, Bryan, Thomas Wetzel, WETZEL.com. If you have questions about education or teachers I get emails all the time with teachers sending me their stories. Um, I could probably write a book from just the behavior stories, but you're welcome to send it to me. I'm not in education anymore, but I can definitely find answers for most people. I've got a lot of teachers in my contact list, so I I typically tell people I will do my best to help you, but you have to understand I have my limitations.
Right. Wow, this has been amazing. Today's conversation just like blew it through the roof. I think you touched base on so many important factors. There's a lot that we need to really, focus on. There's a lot of holes that need to be filled. And, I think people really need to just stop and see how valuable education is and where we're lacking in the educational, realm and what needs to be fixed. People are they don't give teachers enough credit. They don't pay teachers as much as they should. They don't give the teachers the necessary tools so they can do their jobs
Mhm.
the right way. And when it comes to, children with disabilities, they're taken away. Yeah, I see that all the time. My children are grown up too, but I see them taking away a lot of the programs that they used to have that were very
Mhm.
beneficial. And, if we're going to help our children grow and we want our children to be the best they possibly can be, then we really need to take, the initiative and really, push for better educational system throughout our United States because we lack throughout the United States, we lack a lot and now more programs are getting taken away. Teachers need more resources. We need more
Mhm.
programs. We need to look at things differently. And one of the important factors, I think you mentioned that there is no one standard way of doing things, that every child is different and we need to teach, the teachers and we need to, and the school system needs to understand that everything needs to be handled differently according to the situation itself. But I want to thank
Yeah.
you so much for coming on the show.
You're
And
welcome.
if there's anything if you wanted to like take what we talked about today and you really wanted to emphasize on a couple important factors, what would you like to say to the listeners today about today's conversation?
Well, piggybacking on your final statement there, I think that this is the future. And without getting this fixed, our future looks a little less certain. I'm not, like I
Yes.
said, I'm not saying there'll be a crash or the United States will go away, but I don't think that our progress and um, I just think that if you're graduating kids who are not well educated, then we shouldn't be surprised if our progress begins to slow.
Exactly. 100%, 100%. And you see that all the time. Kids get into college and they're completely lost because they're just
Yeah.
not ready for it.
Well, that's funny. There's two lawsuits right now from students, one out, I think out of Vermont. I may be wrong about that, but she's suing her high school because she graduated with honors. I mean, when she got into, I think, Harvard and got there and realized she doesn't know anything. She doesn't know how to read um, well enough, and she's behind and probably failing out.
Right.
Um, and I think there's a group of boys, it might be New Jersey. I have to go back and look. It's been about a month since I read these articles, but they are suing because they also graduated but they don't know how to do the math and reading at grade level, so they're
Yeah.
struggling in college. Um, and maybe that's what has to happen to
Yeah.
motivate the districts to do better. I don't know. I hate having it be fixed through lawfare,
Yeah.
but maybe that's what it takes. I hope
Right.
not.
No, I hope not either. But sometimes that's what have to happen in order for change to occur, unfortunately. It's
Yeah,
true.
you have to scare the
You have to
powers to
spare.
be.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Brian. This has been awesome. I can't wait to see
Thank
you again.
you.
This has been a great conversation, and I know it's going to open up eyes and help a lot of people out there. And if anybody has any questions for Brian, I encourage you to ask them, either leave comments or email him. He's always willing to answer everything. And if you like this show, please follow it and subscribe, and we'll see you soon. Have a great day, Brian.
Bye.